for example, things you'll see in just a moment, and feel, or something else. And attention is the streaming of energy and information flow that can happen between people. And that's the secret sauce for parents, is that your relationship drives energy and information flow within the communication patterns. So as an attachment researcher, that's basically what we study, patterns of communication. So where attention goes, neural firing flows. And neural firing just means you can get certain regions of the brain to interact with each other, and you do that to create a given state of mind with a given moment in time. And but the book I just finished 2 days ago is all about the nature of time and the brain and consciousness and stuff like that. So even as I say time, there probably isn't anything that you really think is time, but let's just talk about in the present moment. In the present moment, you as a parent create this experience that in that moment is getting certain patterns of firing the brain to happen. And here's the secret. Repeated states change the structure of the brain to create a trait. So a state becomes a trait by having a general pattern, for example, in parenting, of activating a certain state of mind that you'll experience in a moment. So that's the whole basis of it. Where attention goes, neural firing flows, and when neural firing is flowing, you actually turn on genes. You get the DNA to be turned into RNA, to go out of the nucleus of the cell, in this case the neuron, to go out to the ribosome for proteins to be made, for the protein production to lead to any number of 3 or 4 changes in the brain, including the growth of synapses or the modulation of synapses. Sometimes, especially in an area called the hippocampus, the growth of new neurons, so neurogenesis. The laying down of myelin, which is a sheath, a healthy sheath that gets coiled around the interconnected neurons and makes the speed of conduction of the action potential, the ions flowing in and out of the membrane. I'm talking like this because this is context-dependent memory of being here at MPI. Yeah. We usually don't do this in a parenting talk, but you're hearing all the details. So basically you're getting the action potential to go to 100 times faster, and after a neuron, the basic cell of the brain, fires off, it needs to rest before it fires again. That's called a refractory period. And if myelin is covering interconnected neurons, the refractory period is 30 times shorter. So 30 times 100 is 3,000, excellent. That's not rocket science, but it is brain science. 3,000 times faster. And it's not just a matter of speed. In the brain, timing and synchrony is everything. So it's more coordinated and balanced. So when you've laid down myelin on top of synaptically connected neurons that create a circuit, and you can add new neurons to that, that's awesome. You make it 3,000 times more effective. So when you're watching the Olympics and you see an athlete do something and you go, oh my God, I couldn't do those flips. You're right. You couldn't do those flips because you hadn't put in the hours to lay down the myelin to make that skill something that they can do 3,000 times better than you. And that's why they can flip and make the timing better. You can't. You could have, but you didn't. They did, and that's it, from discipline. Anyway, so the idea of all that is you can take this as a parent and say, well, you can't change the genes. You actually can change what are called the epigenetic regulators. So now we know, not when I was in training back here in the 80s, but now we know on top of your genes are these non-DNA molecules, histones and methyl groups, that are like the librarians in a library that determine not which books are there, but which books they'll release. And the way that works is you change the epigenetic regulators, you change the way experience will get these genes to be expressed and then neurons to grow. So you can actually shape, either in a positive way or a negative way, epigenetic regulation of genetic expression that determines how your child will respond to events and then grow their brain in response to that. So those are the 4 ways you change your brain. So when we say, okay, we're going to teach you how to do skills that change your brain, these are the 4 ways that research on general developmental neuroscience works, and then you combine that with attachment research and show that parents who do these certain patterns of parenting have children who end up when they're 20 and 30 and 40 with certain traits, that if you look at the work of Alan Srofe, you can demonstrate from statistical analyses these were caused by experience. And an attempt to correlate genetics with attachment patterns has come up with basically very little. So these are experiential ways you shape the development of traits in a person. It's amazing. And so that's the science. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one particular state that gets created a lot after a kid was 12 months of age. How old are you?
Me?
Yeah.
12 and 3/4 years old.
12 and 3/4? Okay, good. Because 12 and a half.
Teenager.
You are an adolescent. You know that, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Tween.
You're a tween. Okay. All right, cool. Cool. Now, you're not alone. I think we have, somewhere else we have another person, but who's younger than, you're lucky because we don't let anyone under 12 and a half in. So you
Just made the
12
cutoff.
and 3/4. I'm
This is very, very unlikely.
That is very unlikely. You're absolutely right. I'm making it up as a joke. Yeah. All right. So, what we're going to do when you're 12 months of age, not 12 years of age, you get a lot of this. And what Tina and I would like you to do is just experience whatever arises in you. So, just to set the stage, all of us in this room have something very, very special called a mind. And one thing that's very special about the mind is it has something called subjective experience, which just means it's a felt texture of lived life that you become aware of with awareness. So all we're going to ask you to do for this exercise is just be aware of whatever you feel. That's it. And we'll do the rest. Okay, you ready? So turn off your gadgets. Sit back, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a word. I'll repeat it several times. Then I'm going to pause. Then I'm going to say another word, repeat that several times. Then I'll pause. Then we'll do a few more things, and then we'll talk about what that was like. Okay? Everybody ready? Okay. No. 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 Yes. 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 And take a nice deep breath. And try putting one hand on your chest and one hand on your abdomen. Just take a nice set of breaths. And now switch it out. Hand to your chest goes to your abdomen. The one on the abdomen goes to your chest. Again, put some gentle pressure and take some nice deep breaths. And now put your hands in whichever configuration, left on top, right on top, whichever one feels the most comforting. Just put it that way. Take some nice deep breaths. Great. And now if you'd like, you can leave your hands there. If your eyes are closed, you can let them come open. Tina and I are going to just do a very brief survey just to see how that felt. And first, let's just do the hand survey. How many felt that putting a hand on the chest and a hand on the abdomen was comforting? Raise your hand really high. Really, really high. Okay, great. And for those who found it comforting, how many found left on top, right on top were about the same? Okay, so take a look. We can do the numbers. Raise your hand really high. You can see. And how many found left on top was the most comforting? Okay, so that's more. And how many right on top is more comforting? Okay, great. So is there anyone seeking a doctoral dissertation? No one knows why, but you have a built-in control group, and I've done this now with thousands and thousands of people. It's always the same. Over 95% find it comforting, of that about 5% find it equal, and it's about the remainder, about 20% find that the left on top is comforting, 80% right on top doesn't seem to be handedness or anything. The only theory I've ever heard that kind of would be reasonable would be political persuasion. But I just did this in the South, and I did it in New York City, and there was no difference, so I don't know if that really would count. But anyway, it would be amazing to get a Ph.D. in this, because you would find out what it does, and if you're interested, let us know later on. Okay, so let's just do a quick survey on how many of you felt no felt different from yes. Raise your hand. Okay, so let's go. We'll just do this exercise. I'll come over here, and just as I pass by with my arm, just shout out a word of what no felt like for you. Just shout out a word. Painful, scary, anxiety, anger, collapsing. Say it again. Canceling, dread, tense, fear, sad, shame, harsh, disturbing, and abusive, dysregulated, mean, threatening, and abrupt, startled, and depressing. Okay, so I'm not even your dad saying you can't have ice cream for dinner or go to a party with your friends if you're an adolescent. Just think about that. A harshly said no creates a subjective state inside of you with this very, very important set of things we'll talk about. Yes?
Is it okay to interrupt with a question?
Not yet. Later we'll do questions. Now let's do yes, because we'll talk about a lot of stuff. Yes. What do yes feel like in contrast? Calming, inviting, worthy, positive, hopeful, validating, questioning.
It was hard to accept after all those no's.
Questioning and hard to accept after all the no's, yeah. Calming, soothing, relaxing, joyful, felt seen, happy, pleasant, warm, supportive, comforting. What's that? Acceptance. Someone's saying seductive. We should talk about that. Yeah. Relieved, safe, and curious and coping. Coping? Open, great. So what Tina and I are going to do now is go deeply into this issue, because this pattern that we've seen in the workshops we do was so clear, and you look at the research on parenting, by the time a child is 12 months of age, they start hearing no a tremendous amount of time. But more than just hearing no in a harsh way, you can actually live a life which has a no quality to it. And we'll talk about what the neurobiology of that is in just a moment. But you can see the difference between no and yes, and we'll get into that.
Yeah, and we were talking about yes brain being a neurological state. You guys were in a different neurological state when you were hearing the no versus the yes. And if you were really paying attention, you might have noticed that your breathing was different. Oftentimes people experience the no as a heavy weight and a constricted ability to breathe that often we don't notice until the yes happens. And then when the yes happens, there's a lightening and opening, and we can respirate. So these neurological states actually have physiological things that go with them as well. So one of the ways that we talk about this is it's not really about just hearing the word no and hearing the word yes. This book is not about how you should tell children yes to their every desire. It's not about permissive parenting.
It's not?
No. So it's not even just the word no. That's a great example. But when your child says to you, I want ice cream now before dinner, and we say, why would you ask for that? You know I'm never going to say yes to that. What a stupid idea. That is a no, it incites a no brain response. So anytime we feel, so let me say it this way. The brain is either in a receptive open state, which was like the yes experience, or it's in a reactive no brain state, right? So a no brain state is one that's defensive, shut down, reactive, disconnected, rigid, perfectionistic, anxious, unwilling to try new things, unwilling to make mistakes or take chances. A yes brain is open and curious, willing to try something that's difficult. It's connected, it is resilient. And in fact, a yes brain is balanced, resilient, insightful, and empathetic. And so those are the four main domains of the yes brain. And we talk about each of those. One of the ways that I like to think about it is that when we have balance, and we have balance over time, we become more resilient. And when we're balanced and resilient, we have the capacity to understand ourselves, which is insight, and the ability to connect with others and see that we are interconnected with each other, which is really what empathy is about.
Exactly. Can I just move your microphone?
Please.
Because your hair now came over there, but now I've got the necklace to deal with. I'm going to go into like makeup next time or something.
I always wear a blazer because it's so much better, and now I know why.
Let me do that. And that's going to be so good.
Okay, if not, I can hold it. See, we're problem
That's good.
solvers.
Okay,
Yes
good.
brain is a problem-solving brain, a brain that is willing to have some adversity
Yeah.
and stay regulated
Yeah.
and be problem solvers.
Exactly. So in this case, like the communication with the sound coming from your hair on the thing made me feel like it was going to block things. But inside of me, I was saying, oh, I don't want to interrupt.
Right.
But I want to make sure everybody could hear you very clearly.
So you were able to hold the complexity of that tension and
Yeah.
wait for the right moment.
Exactly.
We're going to just analyze each other for the next 30 minutes. Okay, so can I talk about balance and resilience?
Please.
Okay. So balance is really about two things. The first is this major, major thing that you guys, I've heard you use the words, emotional regulation. Balance is the ability to, in the face of internal chaos or something going on in our universe, to be able to stay in a state with our own emotions where we regulate ourselves. So one of the ways we talk about this, and let me just give a quick example. So one of my jobs, I have lots of jobs, but one of my jobs is to be a consultant at a school. And so I was in a kindergarten classroom this morning. So I had a little 5 or 6 year old little boy who I was asked to come to the classroom. He had hit his teacher, poked someone in the face with a crayon, and ripped up his newspaper where he was supposed to be highlighting sight words. So this is a child who, in this moment, is struggling with balance. He was not able to stay in a place where he could handle his own emotions. When his feelings got big, he wasn't able to stay with those feelings and stay in a problem-solving state. One of the ways that we talk about that in the book is by considering not just our emotions as little packets of feelings, like happy, sad, but to think about what I learned from Dan in this field of interpersonal neurobiology, the embodied brain, to think about the entire nervous system. When our nervous system is well balanced, we call that the green zone. And when we're in the green zone, even when things get really hard, even when our feelings get big, we still handle ourselves well. We can stay in that green zone. If our emotions get really intense, or our nervous system, what's called neuroception, which is sort of a perception of safety versus danger. If our neuroception says danger, danger, we go into not a receptive yes brain state, but we can go into a no brain reactive state. And that can look like acting out behaviors or kind of having the physiological changes that happen in this, what we call the red zone, where your muscles get tense, your heart beats faster, your blood pressure increases, your blood pressure, heart rate, and respiration all increase, your muscles get tense, and you move into fight and flight and sometimes freeze. But you're in this kind of mobilized state of heightened arousal. We call that the red zone. And then the opposite of that is also a reactive state that we call the blue zone. And this is a state of hypoarousal, where our nervous system goes into collapse and faint. And in these states, we are not able to access the higher parts of our brain that allow us to be regulated. So many of you know Dan's model of the flipping your lid, right? And so when we're in the green zone, we have actually an integrated brain where there's a flow of energy and information between all the parts so that we're not just reactive like primitive reptiles. But when we flip our lids or we go into a reactive state, we may have acting out behaviors or we may have these collapse behaviors. So this is really cool because, and I know I'm just kind of giving you a broad brush view here, but balance is really about the ability to stay in the green zone when things get difficult and to be able to move yourself back into the green zone when it's hard. And one of the most important ways we can support kids when they are not balanced, when they are in a red zone or a blue zone is, first of all, proactively teaching kids about their own little nervous systems. In the book, we give examples of that. There's cartoons in there. The team of therapists that work with me have lots of really fun ways that they've done this with kids, talking about the red zone is the volcano, the green zone is the meadow, and the blue zone is like an iceberg, kind of like shut down and rigid. You can call them animals too. You know, there could be a panther, a panda, and a possum. Those are all really good ways to kind of talk about it with kids. But we can teach them about that. So then they have this awareness, and by the way, it's really good for us to be like, oh, I'm so close to going into the red zone right now. So we have to think about our own balance. And then and one big part of balance is making sure our kids get enough sleep. We are a nation of chronically sleep-deprived children and adolescents, and that they have the second part of balance that I began to talk about, where we have a healthy mind platter, which I'll let Dan talk about, but where we have a balanced life, where we're not just focused on one piece of a narrow view of success or something along those lines. So balance is about emotional regulation, and it's about having a balanced life where we do self-care.
Beautiful. Yeah, and the idea, a couple of layers of what we're talking about. So Tina's bringing up the first two letters of a confessional we need to make, which is that this is actually an acronyms anonymous meeting. We have an addiction to making acronyms. So the acronym for this book is very cheesy. It's BRIE. B-R-I-E, so you don't have to memorize that, you just remember the cheese. So balance and resilience and insight and empathy, that's what we're talking about. And for the balance and resilience part, it's really this very useful paradigm for teaching, let's say, educators about how to provide social and emotional learning for kids. So this weekend I was just at a new retreat center up near Silicon Valley, where we had 150 educators from all over the world, and they were learning this yes brain approach about how do you actually teach students K through 12 to actually know their inner life, which we'll get into in a moment with insight and empathy. But the balance and resilience part is really this fundamental way where the inner life of a child is seen and respected. And there's all sorts of fantastic programs, and I'll just give you an example of one, which is about balance and resilience and also actually insight and empathy. It's the program out of Yale, out of the Center for Emotional Intelligence that Mark Brackett runs, and it's a wonderful acronym. So we had an acronym addiction meeting there up at 1440, the Multiversity, where we had this. What RULER stands for in terms of emotions is R, can you recognize an emotion that's going on? So it really invites a student, or let's talk about in terms of parenting, it invites a parent to really teach a child that their inner life is important. Now you may say, well, what's so important about the inner life? And just down the hallway, I remember when I finished with my first patient, when I was a resident here, back in 1985. So it was my second year of residency, or probably third year, or something like 85, yeah, 84, 85. She got better, and I had no idea why she got better. I had no idea. So I said, well, you know, at UCLA, we have this protocol we do when someone's gotten better and they're going to finish therapy, we have an exit interview, which we didn't have, but I thought that would be kind of important to find out what happened. And she said, oh, that's such a great idea. I said, well, UCLA is just a primo program. And so we do that. She goes, great. I said, so let's talk about what you think helped you get better. She goes, oh, that's so obvious. So I said, yeah, I know it's obvious. But if you had to put words to it, what would you say? I'll never forget this. It was just down here on the sea level. And not the ocean floor, but I mean, this is the sea level. And so she goes, well, never before in my life have I ever had the experience of feeling felt by anyone. And that made all the difference. And I took that expression, feeling felt, that she said, I can actually see her in my mind's eye, and I actually know her name, and I can't say her name, obviously, but I want to thank her and credit her for this incredible quote, feeling felt. It is such a beautiful and clear, articulate way of saying probably the most important social experience we can have is that we feel felt by another person. And when I was People probably don't know this, but I'll confess. I went to USC for college. Oh. When I was at SC for college, because my dad was a professor and there was free tuition. And so I went to college there, and I was on the suicide prevention service where we had the whole neighborhood around USC where people were calling in. We were the local suicide prevention service. And I was taught that when someone calls in a suicidal crisis, what you do is you tune into their internal state, their feelings, and you just stay with them in that state. So if they call saying, oh, I can't go on anymore, I've got this gun, I just can't do it, I can't do it anymore, and you say, it was a beautiful sunrise, didn't you see it? What's wrong with you that you want to, no, that's not what you do. You tune into their pain. Now you may say, why? Well, because then the person's not alone. They feel felt. And what before was an isolated system, if you just think in terms of energy and information flow, if I'm suffering and Tina tunes into me, at that moment, we become part of a larger whole. And there's all sorts of reasons when you look at complexity theory why that actually makes both people larger than their private selves. Even if you're the clinician or the kid on a suicide prevention service listening, it makes all the difference. You feel this powerful way we would now connected in this deep way. So in terms of Mark Brackett's ruler stuff, recognizing your emotions allows you to get in touch with them yourself, and certainly you can do this for someone else. You is understanding emotions, understanding what do they mean in your life. What does it mean to have despair, for example? L is labeling it, and you probably know some of the most important studies on labeling emotions came out of this institution, UCLA, that when you get, if you take your hand model of the brain, massive firing, especially, emotion comes from the body, the brainstem deep in your palm here in your hand model, your limbic area, and upward into the cortex. So emotion is everywhere. But what happens is when you have a huge emotion and you label it accurately, the whole brain becomes more regulated. It's quite beautiful work. Right? And other institutions have done as well, but Matt Lieberman and others were able to show this. And Naomi Eisenberger, just fantastic work. And the point here is that recognizing, understanding, and labeling allows you to name it, to tame it. Right? And then E is expressing the emotion. So the person on the suicide line, when she or he is able to express what she's feeling, it gives you the opportunity to connect with other people. And then R is to regulate. So that's the ruler approach. And what the studies that are so clear in the research show is that when you teach kids this ruler approach in schools, they actually do much better. And Mark was able to show even when you go into an organization like a university or like a company, or they didn't study the level of politics, but that would be interesting. When the leader of some group shows these features of being able to recognize, understand, label, express, and regulate their emotion, the entire system does much better. And when that person doesn't do that stuff, the whole system doesn't function very well. You got a feeling of that. No is a massive dysregulation, dismissing. I'm not your dad telling you no about anything. Think about it. We're just human beings sitting here in these bodies. I'm up here, Tina's up here, you're sitting. I go, no, no, no. And you almost jumped out of your chair. I'm sorry about that. And someone had to close his ears, right? Because it wasn't such a good feeling, was it? No. And I'm just saying no. So just think about that. If I were your boss, give you a no approach, or a teacher, or a parent, right? So you can kind of get a feeling for the power of this. So balance and resilience is an invitation for parents or other care providers, anyone helping a kid develop, schools, anyone, to say, the inner life is not icing on the cake. It is the cake. In fact, it's the main course. And yet we forget about that. Often in parenting, you'll see a lot of parents, now this gets the insight and empathy, you'll see a lot of parents who parent to behavior, and they don't see the mind beneath the behavior. So you may say, well, hold on, Dan, what's the mind? So at a minimum, we'll say the mind is a word that refers to a number of facets, but one of the facets is subjective experience. So we're not using mind like intellect, so we would never say in interpersonal neurobiology, mind versus heart. You just wouldn't talk like that. It doesn't make any sense. the mind is fully embodied in our view, and it's fully relational also. And this is if you read the book Mind, you'll see the scientific reasoning behind that. But the issue of pulling it just out of the brain alone is because subjective experience doesn't just live in the head. So in March, we're having we have an annual interpersonal neurobiology meeting. We've been doing this for 20 years here at UCLA, and I carved out a whole morning where it's me and Antonio Damasio from USC, and all we're going to talk about is, how does the brain in the head relate to the full picture of what the mind is? So please join us there for that if you want. But the issue here is that we've had 2,500 years of just sticking the mind up in the head. And this brain science is fabulous, but the brain is part of a larger system, which is the whole body. But if you really think about energy and information flow terms, it's not just limited by the skull or the skin. It's happening in the betweenness. So for insight and empathy, what we teach parents how to do is say, look, you can actually teach your child to go to the inner life, to see what's happening right now, to reflect on what happened before, to actually develop what's called a prospective mind, to plan for the future. And all of this is part of insight. The wonderful researcher Endel Tolding up in Toronto, he's got this great term, mental time travel. And that's what we mean by insight. So Endel uses this phrase, autonoetic consciousness. So I had the opportunity to go to Berlin, and we were doing a thing on the brain, culture, and narrative, and Endel and I were table partners, whatever, for this little think tank. But to watch his mind think about these deep layers of memory when it came, for example, to the Holocaust, and what the narrative was in that culture, and how having insight or not is driven into the narratives of how we live. You can only imagine the intensity of conversations we had as academics about, how all these things are interconnected. The narrative you have in a culture, including this yes brain narrative, is everything. So Tina and I wrote a book called No Drama Discipline, right? And we wrote about it. Time magazine misquoted us in something they did, and it became a disaster. My father-in-law actually died right before the magazine came out, so I went offline for a month. And all these horrible, horrible things happened in the media with this narrative. I mean, there was a firestorm of fury about it from a lot of my colleagues here at UCLA. Because we said something we never said, which was basically what we said was the word discipline is really a word that means teaching. It means teaching. So if you really want to be a disciplinarian, you're a teacher. That's what it is. And American culture as a culture, has taken the narrative of the word discipline and given it the term punishment. Right? And so we just said, severe punishment is actually really bad for you. It's bad for the brain in the case of abuse, but punishment is not what discipline is. And anyway, Time magazine extracted some things, manipulated them, made an eyeball catching kind of thing, and it was a nightmare.
But we were resilient.
We were resilient.
we wrote a response.
We wrote a response which they refused to print. So we wrote to Arianna Huffington. She said, I'll print that and put it on the front page. And so just read the Arianna Huffington rebuttal to...
And not the timepiece.
Not the timepiece, no. Not the timepiece. But that gets into a narrative, So parties, I would go to UCLA, people go, how dare you say that? I go, what? You didn't read the rebuttal? And so I would send those around. So thank you for having us back. But the issue there for insight and empathy is we live immersed in a culture with a narrative. So if you just think about like Friends of the Semmel and the Open Mind Institute, or Jane is here, Jane Semmel. You think about, Jane, what you supported in NPI back in the day, and Sue Smalley and I, were with you and talking about, could NPI bring mindful awareness as a research center, which didn't exist in any university at the time, in terms of really lodging it right in a psychiatry department. It was beautiful, what you support. But the idea is that if it means something to you, you can make a difference with it. So what we do in the Yes Brain is say, you can promote an emphasis on balance, resilience, insight, and empathy. And amazingly, if you look at, insight is basically knowing your inner life, empathy would be, there's at least 5 aspects of empathy we'll talk about, but it's basically looking at the inner life of someone else, right? And there's a whole bunch of stuff we're comparing empathy to compassion we'll talk about in a moment. But the important thing to say in terms of these 5 facets of empathy is you can teach a kid each of these 5. The first one is feeling another person's feelings. And what's really crucial about that is to make sure that they understand you can be open to another person's feelings, but you need to maintain a differentiated nature, because one of the fundamental laws that we're talking about, laws meaning the principles that we want to teach, is called integration, where you're differentiating and linking. That's what integration is. If a person is excessively taking the feelings of another person, they will burn out. So if they're just a friend, they'll burn out in their friendship. If they're, in a marriage, they'll burn out in their marriage. If they're a therapist, they'll burn out being therapists. If, they're clinicians and they don't learn the art of differentiation and linkage, then they can have too much emotional resonance. Because of that, in the literature, a number of people have written books, like people of quite renowned status, The Downside of Empathy, where you'll see something called The Dark Side of Emotional Intelligence. And when you look at that, they're really just pointing out this finding that excessive resonance without differentiation, they don't talk about it like that, but leads to burnout. So I write these books where I say, be empathic, be empathic. Our book is with empathy, Brainstorm is with empathy, all these things, and I'll get reviewers saying, Dan is promoting empathy, and we know now that's bad. So I write back to the reviewers, I say, well, who says it's bad? They go, Tanya Singer in Germany. So I was lecturing in Germany recently. I was up on stage with Tanya Singer. I said, Professor Singer, everyone is quoting to you. She's the main person people quote. I said, they're saying that you're saying empathy is bad. She goes, what are you talking about? I said, here's the study they're quoting. She goes, that's my study. And I said, and they say empathy is bad. She goes, they are totally wrong. Almost every human being on this planet can't have compassion unless they have empathy. There are a few she found from Tibet who've been meditating for 40,000 hours, and they figured out a way to be just compassionate, period. There's compassionate without having to go inside of someone else. But for the most part, we all need the root of empathy to get the compassion. So here are the 5 parts of empathy. Keeping in mind the first one we just mentioned, emotional resonance. If you do it without differentiation, sure, you're vulnerable to burnout. So whether you call that pathological altruism or too much empathy, we have to be careful, especially in these days, that it doesn't become part of the narrative. Empathy's bad, didn't you hear? You want to teach empathy in our schools. Oh my God, that's terrible. It's a really, I think it's a misuse of the science, and that's a quote from Tanya Singer. So you can quote her for me. So there's emotional resonance. The second thing is perspective taking. Thinking, okay, well, if I was Tina right now, I'd say, Dan, you're talking too much. Curb your enthusiasm. No? Okay, never. Okay. But anyway, so I can put myself through Tina's eyes. So that's perspective taking. The third one is basically where you have the capacity to understand stuff. So if Tina says, hey, Dan, I know you grew up in LA and this thing happened to your grandmother when you were 8, and I know that was really hard for you, and now you have a close friend who's your grandmother's age, and she's having the same thing happen. That must mean this is really symbolically hard for you. She'd be showing empathic understanding, right? She wouldn't really be feeling my feelings so much, and even taking my perspective in the moment, you'd be really thinking about what it means for me. So that's number 3. And these are all teachable skills. The fourth one is empathic concern, which is identical to compassion, where you say, wow, I feel your suffering. You know something? I think if I do X, Y, and Z, even if I just hear your pain or maybe give you some water if you're coughing, I can actually do something to reduce your suffering. And that's empathic concern. So to say that empathy is bad when compassion is actually built into one facet of empathy actually is illogical. And the fifth thing is something that is like the most underdeveloped emotion in probably our modern civilization, and that's empathic joy, where someone else is happy and you get really happy for their happiness. You get really jazzed with their success. Can you imagine if we took all the energy we have as human beings and just cultivated other people being happy? Wouldn't that be amazing? That you can cultivate in people if you switch the narrative Because right now the narrative is limited resources, not enough, get it for yourself, anyone else who's got it, they're a threat to you, or if they're not in your in-group, they're in your out-group, they're horrible, ignore them or kill them. I mean, basically, that's the simple human narrative, when in fact we grew to be collaborative. Anyway, so insight and empathy are things that are teachable, and the beautiful thing about it, and the reason why Tina and I put all the energy into writing these books, and each of them kind of builds on the other one, is that when you do this, when you get to the specifics of doing it, you see how you can build balance, resilience, insight, and empathy. And we really feel strongly that it's a way of redefining what it means to create success. And that we can talk about more later, but that's my rant.
And I'm going to use some empathic care, and think you're probably thirsty right now.
You,
and it gives me great joy to care for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So since we just have a few minutes left before we would love to visit with you and chat with you and answer some questions and talk with you, I feel a little bit of a compellingness. I feel compelled to tell a story that might encompass all the cheese. The BRIE, balance, resilience, insight, and empathy.
Great, and before you get into it, can I just say, because I'm going to forget this, if you want to go into more depth, actually on Saturday for the Mindful Awareness Research Center, we're doing a workshop for them from 10 to 1 at the NRB auditorium this coming Saturday. So if that's something you'd be interested in, want to know more details, because I know we are short of time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And then, so I want to share a story, and then we'll just kind of talk about a new definition of success, and then we can visit with everybody. So my son, I have 3 boys who are now 17, 14, and 11. And this story took place, and I have permission from my children to share these stories, and this story is in this book. But my youngest, JP, was probably about 6 at the time, 5 or 6, and Luke was about 8 at the time. And I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth or putting on makeup or something, and Luke came running in and said, "Mom, JP 5-starred me." Now, I didn't know what that meant, but apparently it's where you slap someone so hard it leaves a handprint that looks like the 5 points of a star. And I said, "Oh no, where?" And he lifted up the back of his shirt, and you could see JP's sweet little hand on Luke's back. And I said, "Oh, Luke, it's so red, I can see it." And he said, "I can't see it." So I said, I took a picture of it so I could show Luke. And then I comforted Luke. And I said, "I'm so sorry that must hurt. You know, do you want me to put a cool rag on it?" You know, and Luke was very interested in the moment in making sure that JP was going to get dealt with. Right? That's what Luke was most concerned about. So I comfort Luke, and now comes the discipline moment. Right? I got to go address the perpetrator. It's not okay to hit. And so I'm going to go and have this discipline moment. And I come around the corner, and JP is standing there. I'm hearing all my noises here. Yeah, help. So JP is standing there.
Take this. Put that down. No, it's going to be good. Put that down there. Put that like that. You're going to be so good.
Thank you. I just try not to move too much.
No, now you can move.
Okay. So JP, I come around the corner, and JP is in the red zone. His nervous system is in hyperarousal, and he is fuming. His muscles are tense, and he's like... Now, I know in this moment, my most important thing is that I have to stay in the green zone. And I also know that when JP is in the red zone, when he's in a reactive state of mind, when he's having a no-brain moment, his social engagement circuitry has turned off. It's going to be difficult for him to hear what I'm saying. It's going to be difficult for him to problem solve. It's going to be nearly impossible for him to feel empathy. And he's definitely not in a state of mind in which he can learn. And remember, the whole point of discipline is to build children who become self-disciplined, and that requires a lot of teaching and skill building. So he's in the red zone. He's not balanced. So the first thing I do in the name of discipline and in the name of balance, and from a yes brain state myself, is my job is to create a haven and create safe, seen, help him feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure. And the way I do that is through empathy, connection, and soothing him. And I treat him as if he were physically hurt. When our kids are physically hurt, it's really easy to show that empathy and say, "Oh, that hurts so much. Come here, let me help take care of you." That's easy to do when they're physically hurt. But when they're emotionally in distress, especially when that emotional distress has led them to not so good behavior, it's much harder to respond in that way. So I say to him, "Oh, JP, you're so angry. Come here." And I open my arms to him and I pull him to me. He doesn't really want to be held very much because he's still like, he's fuming. And I say, "What happened, baby?" And I'm thinking, maybe it's attainment, right? We're going to help integrate the flow of energy and information in his brain and between us. And he says, begins to tell the story about how they had been on the phone with their grandparents. He set up the story and his brother Luke told the punchline. And when they got off the phone, he's the little guy, remember, the youngest of three. They got off the phone, he said, "Luke, I didn't like that. I wanted to tell Juju that story." And Luke made fun of him. He said, "And then he made fun of me. I tried to use my words, so I 5-starred him." And in this moment, he's glad he did it, right? And so here I am in this moment. He's not in a balanced state. I recognize that. I keep myself balanced. And now is the discipline moment, which is where I'm going to promote resilience. Because resilience is about not distracting kids from feeling, not shaming them for feeling, and really saying sometimes life is hard and you can do it and I'm right here with you if you need support, right? That's what resilience is about. We are in a generation where parents bubble wrap their children so they don't feel anything uncomfortable at all. And guess how you learn to be resilient? You practice feeling difficult emotions. And you weather them through connection and through skills that you have. So this is an opportunity. This discipline moment is an opportunity to make him more resilient by teaching him skills, by helping him have insight and empathy. And here's how I did that. So I say to him, helping him feel felt, using connection to pull him back into the green zone where he can learn. And I say, "JP, that would have made me so mad too. I can understand why that was so upsetting to you. That must have been so frustrating." And as I say that, I feel his little body going into the green zone because his little muscles relax, his breath gets more regulated, his whole system just kind of settles down. It's like the dial is turned down and he's back into the green zone. And this is where he can learn. So I say to him, "I know you know it's not okay to hurt your brother. So what was going on for you? What happened there?" And he begins to tell me. Now, a typical parental response might be to say, "Go tell your brother you're sorry." Now, before he's had the connection with me where he's gotten down into the green, he doesn't care that he hurt Luke. He wished he had 10-starred him, really, right? He doesn't. When you're in a reactive no-brain state, you cannot feel empathy. So another parental response, another no-brain parenting kind of response would be to say, "Go to your room. I can't believe you would do something like that." And then sending him away in a punitive, reactive way where I'm in a reactive state. That does nothing to build skills, doesn't help him be more resilient. Or we often tell kids or give them the message, we basically say, once you're nice, you can come back out. Which basically tells them, I'm only interested in being in relationship with you when you have it all together. And that's the opposite message we want to give. We want to say to them, at your falling apartedness, at your worst times, I am here. Now, there are certain expectations and boundaries about behavior. We're not going to accept all behaviors. That's not what I'm talking about. We're accepting all feelings, right? So we can talk about what happened for you. What did that feel like in your body? And you went into the red zone. Remember we talked about that? Yeah, and then we say, okay, what can you do? So we did a lot of insight there. What was that like for you? How did you feel that? What was happening? And then we can talk about what can you do differently next time? Because sometimes we are going to have big feelings, but how can we understand them, express them, recognize them, all of those ruler words that Dan talked about. What can you do differently next time? So we talk about that. And then here comes the part with empathy. I say to him, what can you do? I said, you really hurt Luke. And actually something amazing happened in that moment. Now, he's in the green zone or this would not have happened. I said, you really hurt Luke. I said, in fact, I want to show you. And I showed him the picture of the handprint. And when I told him that, I said, you really hurt Luke. This is what happened. He did this. Now, that's a really powerful thing. That is healthy guilt, which is very different from shame. Shame is, I'm a defective, horrible person, and I am broken and cannot be fixed. Guilt is, ooh, I did something I shouldn't have done. It's conscience. And when we think about how we had to live together in tribes in order to survive not being eaten, and we had this feeling when we violated the mores of our group, we would get this feeling like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And guilt is a really unpleasant feeling. I mean, the nervous system doesn't want to feel that again. So allowing, if you talk about energy and information flow, what we give attention to makes neural firing flow and then grow and connect. So when I give his attention to what was happening for you, what did that feel like? What can you do differently next time? You really hurt your brother, and he feels that feeling like, oh yeah, I shouldn't have done that. And I allow him to feel that feeling in silence. I just said, you really hurt your brother, and I was quiet for a moment. The head went down. And again, I go back to feeling felt, and I said, I can see that you feel badly about how you hurt your brother. So guess what? Now you have a chance to make things right. How can you make things right with Luke? And then he has to think about what kind of apology would make Luke feel okay. So this is the empathy piece. And at the end of that interaction, I have disciplined. I have taught, I have built skills. We've done balance, resilience, insight, and empathy. We've done those things. And so when he has these repeated experiences, and I don't parent perfectly, I know Dan does, but no, we both have told confessions. Yeah. The more experiences he has like that, the more his brain wires to do it more automatically. And what happens is his green zone grows. So it takes a lot to send him into a no-brain state. So this is how we influence how that brain gets wired through our relationships with them. And so all of this leads us to rethinking, what do we mean when we say, how do we help a child be successful in this world? And Dan and I, the first conversation we had about this book, we were having dinner, our spouses, and we were talking about, do we have another book? What is it? What would it look like? And we were talking about kids who, by all marks, are successful. They've gone to the best colleges and gotten these amazing degrees, and they have all the gold stars and the trophies, and are lost and have no inner compass and don't have the capacity to be balanced, resilient, insightful, or empathetic. They have lost their inner spark, and they do not have a compass that drives them. And so when we think about this there's nothing wrong with trophies and gold stars and doing well and going to great colleges. There's nothing wrong with that. It's awesome, it's wonderful. But if that is all we are working towards, we are really missing important opportunities. These rates of anxiety and depression and suicide are people who have not had the opportunity to, it's very complex, we're not going to get into all of that, but to say, if we give children the skills and the capacity to be balanced, resilient, insightful, and empathetic, to have yes brains and to approach the world, yes, open and curious, we are going to do them so much more good than we are if we are just driving the gold stars and the trophies. It's too narrow a definition of success.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. What a great story. Before we open it up for questions, what I'd like to do is just really thank Tina for all your incredible storytelling for now, but also collaboration together. It's really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you for teaching me everything I know.
Oh, you teach me a lot. So I just want to build on the story about JP and Luke because, and then, so maybe we'll get the microphone ready to go around for a Q&A. But just, I just got to share this incredibly exciting science about stuff that supports the deep nature of what Tina just beautifully described. And basically, it looks at an evolutionary view of the human brain and the capacity to know minds, which in our world we call mind sight, to see the mind. And it looks like, from an evolutionary point of view, there's probably a lot of reason to believe the machinery of the brain that we harness to know the mind of another, to see where their attention is going, their intention, and what's in their awareness. We know exactly which circuits of the brain those involve, so it's the superior temporal sulcus, temporal parietal junction, and the medial prefrontal cortex, for those who like that stuff. That stuff of knowing another mind in the brain is exactly the stuff we use to actually know our own mind and have consciousness itself. It's absolutely fascinating. So if you think about what Luke and JP and Ben, Tina and Scott's kids, what they get is that communication that was happening between a mom and a son is basically getting those areas activated. So instead of you just going, go to your room or tell your brother you're sorry, something like that, a no-brain response, which wouldn't activate those circuits of balance, resilience, insight, and empathy. Instead, Tina could get herself in the state, and that's challenging, but it's really hard.
Because the red zone's contagious.
Yeah, and so he's in the red zone, you get there, and we can talk about that too, but you got yourself in this space to allow his superior temporal sulcus, temporal parietal junction, and the medial prefrontal cortex, these areas for insight and empathy, to actually become activated with what Steve Porges calls the social engagement system. And in our series, we have all these textbooks with Norton, two of them now, but one of them is called the polyvagal theory, the other is the pocket-guided polyvagal theory, but you can see 350 pages about this fundamental thing we're talking about. But it's just so beautiful, because here you see a beautiful parenting example, and then it's building on the neuroscience of these integrated function. Integrated means you're linking differentiated parts. And what's so exciting about it, and I didn't tell you this because I just got back from a 2-week touring thing, so many parents just say, this is so accessible.
Good.
In getting the science of the brain and understanding how their relationship can make the brain more integrated. So thank you for sharing with us, and now we have time for Q&A.
One thing that's really exciting, just while we're getting ready, I'm not sure who's moderating questions, but one thing that's really exciting is that, like our other books, we have lots of cartoons in there, so they are accessible. And I had a mom email me this last week and said, my son keeps saying, Mom, when are you going to get to the next chapter? Because he's waiting for his mom to get far enough along that he can get the Yes Brain Kids section, because there are cartoons he can read to kids to teach them about their own minds.
Let's switch sides, and I'll get if that's good. Okay, is this on? There we go. So is there a handheld mic? Or there we go. So if you have a question, raise your hand. Here's a question here. Anyone on this side? Here comes the talking stick. Thank you again for coming.
Is 16 too old to teach empathy?
No.
How about 24?
No.
Keep going.
I have a grandson who is so empathetic to his dogs, but not to people. And he understands his siblings perfectly. He understands his parents perfectly. And I honestly think he understands himself, but he has no empathy. So I need to say.
Well, in the book Mindsight, there's a story I have of a 92-year-old gentleman who came for therapy for the first time that I call Stuart, who also everyone thought he had no empathy. And then in the course of the treatment, which you can see in the book, you'll see how he developed empathy. The Brainstorm book would be a good book for you to read about, is this your son or your grandson?
Grandson.
Your grandson. Just, you can read that book, because there are a lot of people who go through an adolescent period, especially with their family, and they need to distance themselves, not from their dogs, but from the other people in their family. And if you see him with his friends, he's probably super empathic. And that's just a part of, but anyway, everyone has a particular thing, but take a look at the Brainstorm book, and that might help you
I need to give
understand.
it to my daughter.
You can give it to your daughter, yes, or give it to your grandson. Yeah, there you go.
Very bright.
I wrote it for adolescents to read, including 12 and 3/4-year-olds. Thank you. And these are skills, literally, some people are really challenged in them, but they're learnable skills. Empathy is a learnable skill. Yeah. Anyone else with a question? There we go. Raise your hand high when here comes the talking stick, right? You can just, whose ever hand is up.
Yes, I also raised 3 sons, and I have a question. I hear that empathy for Luke or JP, but if my Luke was sitting there, I'd be really pissed that the kid that hit me is getting all this nice
That is a
sympathetic.
great question. So you know what I do is I make sure that Luke is not listening to my conversation with Jake. Really, because, so here's the deal. In order to really learn and to think about others and problem solve, we have to be in that regulated state. Luke's still mad that he's been hit, and I've comforted him, but he's a little older. I say, is it okay if I go talk to JP? Yeah, you should go talk to him, that kind of thing. So when I go and talk to JP, I'm talking to JP and I'm making sure that Luke is not hearing me. Because what happens is children, before they develop into where they can understand this, Luke might experience that as me taking JP's side and not taking seriously how he felt. So I go and I have a conversation with JP, and then I come back and Luke says, did you talk to him? And I say, yes, I talked to him. We talked about how that was not okay. We talked about how he's going to do things differently. Do you need anything else? Or is your back feeling okay? So I think what happens is when they both hear it, is that, no, that's not fair, Mom, you're not even taking, and then you get into this, and then no one can get anywhere in the yes. Then we all end up in the no brain. So separating.
I have a 14-year-old daughter, and when I pick her up from high school, she's very negative, and I think it's because all the stressors of school, but she doesn't ever want to talk about her feelings. So how do I get around that? Or, sometimes I feel kind of like the punching bag verbally, like she's just so, where do you go with that?
You have a daughter, but I have one suggestion. Sometimes parents will tell me, my kid is so lovely all day at school, and their teachers talk about how lovely they are, and people think that my child is so lovely, but the minute they get in the car, they are verbally abusive to me. And a couple things we need to know, because when our children act in ways like this, we want to approach with curiosity, like I hear you doing. And a lot of times kids don't eat enough food during lunch. They either don't have time or they're talking to their friends. Sometimes the blood sugar levels when we pick them up are low. So I often pick my kids up with a drink and a snack, and that keeps their mouth busy while they have a few minutes to decompress. Sometimes I turn music on in the cars, and I think when we immediately start talking, tell me about how was your day, like that, they're just done. So just saying like, hey, glad to see you. I brought you a snack, and just give her a moment. That might help her sort of kind of come back into, because they do, what happens at school, we have forgotten what it's like to be in school all day. Even on your breaks, the social politics are so mentally and emotionally demanding, and trying to navigate the world, their capacity, I think, just starts going like this. So then one little thing like, oh, I forgot to tell you you have an orthodontist appointment, is a demand that exceeds their capacity sometimes, right? And they fly off the handle, and you're like, we're paying for braces, what are you so upset about? So their capacity drops. So just giving them some time to recharge and have some space. So just sort of, that's one suggestion.
Yeah, that's beautiful. This could be an entire evening, your question. But it's important just to give a big framework. In the Brainstorm book, you'll see, what research says about the adolescent brain, that changes roughly between 12 and 24 years of age. So there are a lot of changes that are going on. So that book, if you haven't seen the book, would be good for you to read. Here at the NPI, we just read. It's important to remind ourselves, many psychiatric disorders first present during adolescence, not because of raging hormones probably, but because of the remodeling of the brain. So if there are really persistent problems and a child is completely withdrawn and showing signs of not connecting with friends and other things, you can see people getting depression and be very irritable a lot. And so it's important to just say that. That being said, it's also true that when you look at, for example, studies here at UCLA of kids who are just not having any kind of clinical syndromes, but you show an adolescent a neutral face in a photograph in a scanner, and it super gets activated and interprets a neutral face as hostile. So this was a very helpful research finding. So if my son or daughter would come home, I'd say, hi. They go, what do you mean? Like this. I go, hi. They go, you do it again. Like this. I wouldn't say, oh, your amygdala is much more sensitive now than your adolescent. No, you don't do that. I just said, okay, and I'll give them the space, let them get a snack, whatever, all these things that Tina's beautifully talking about. So we just want to keep that in mind, just you want to see, because if kids are showing these roller coasters, this is why the Brainstorm book would be a good book to read, because it really can give you a lot of reassurance. If your kid is doing okay in school and has friends and all these things, but is just irritable with you, that's a pretty common profile for any of us who have adolescents. And mine are 28 and 23 now, and they're not like that anymore, but they used to be, and they get through it.
Is Alex here? Alex is here. He popped in earlier.
Oh, he did? No, I didn't see him. Oh, cool. Okay. My son. Oh, where is he? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Ooh, it's loud.
Yes.
Are there times where taking away privileges or doing what people would consider other traditional punishments would help teach your kids empathy and these other items?
I have a very strong opinion.
Go for it.
And I don't know if you'll 100% agree with me, but here's what I have done. I used to be a mom who believed in punitive timeouts and in using consequences and all of those things. And the more I learned about the brain and all of this whole approach, I completely moved away from that. And here's what I am not universally against consequences. In fact, I'm a huge fan of natural consequences. And natural consequences and logical consequences are very different from each other. Natural consequences are things that you have nothing to do with. So your kid leaves their bike outside and it rains, their bike gets wet. You know, that's not something you did to the child. It's just something. And I'm a big fan of letting kids experience, like, oh, that's such a bummer because you do have to ride your bike to school. You need to find a bag or your bottom's going to be wet or whatever. I'm really sorry that's a bummer that it got wet. So we can still have empathy. A logical consequence is something that makes sense. So like in JP's situation when he hit his brother, I could have said the logical consequence for that would be to say, you clearly can't be with people in a really good way today, so I'm taking away your play date this afternoon. The problem with that, in my experience clinically and as a mom and understanding the research, is that it directs the child's attention to something else. So if I tell JP, I'm taking away your play date, all of his attention goes to how mean I am to do that to him, and it was Luke's fault in the first place. And he does not reflect on his own role. He misses the opportunity for him to actually be held accountable to what happened and to really look at what he did as part of the process there. So I think that a lot of times when we give consequences or remove privileges, first of all, we often do it because we're mad and it feels good to be punitive in that moment. So oftentimes a consequence or taking away privilege or some sort of punishment is a reaction on our part and we haven't thought about it intentionally. So if you are going to give a consequence, it's much better to say, I need to think about how I'm going to respond to this and be really intentional about how you use it. Second of all, I think it's often counterproductive because it distracts kids away from learning the lesson and building the skills. I think asking him to have a reflective dialogue with me about the situation and making things right with his brother, those are in fact consequences. In fact, having a reflective dialogue with me, my boys would probably much rather me take away the they don't want to have a reflective dialogue. So I will say I'm also not universally against consequences. I think they actually make sense more as kids get older. I know that might seem strange, but for younger children, oftentimes the behavioral problems are because the child is dysregulated, because they don't have a brain that's as integrated yet. If my, say, middle schooler is playing on his phone instead of doing his homework, I will say to him, I can see that it's hard for you to do what you're supposed to be doing with the phone in the room with you, and you're showing me that you don't yet have the skill to use that self-discipline, so until that skill is built, I'm going to hold your phone for you during homework times. That's totally a consequence, but see how it's based on, and I think it's appropriate, I think that's a really good parental response, but it's based on skill building and his capacity and not as a punishment. I could say the same thing saying like, you're supposed to be doing your homework, I'm taking your phone away, you're not allowed to have your phone after school for the rest of the year. It feels totally different, the way we approach it by doing skill-based. So that's my take on punishment, consequences, kind of stuff.
I'm with you.
Okay.
A common problem seems to be children who are addicted to their telephones. Goes for adults also. But how do you stop the child who's addicted to his cell phone?
Screen addiction. Do you want to talk about that?
Screen addiction, yeah. So this is one of the biggest challenges in the last 10 years for parenting. And it's, on a number of levels, it's extremely concerning. So just to highlight those, and not that you need to be more concerned, but if you think about the kind of stimuli that is entering the child's brain that is not of a pro-social nature, not about conversations, not about connecting, not about insight, not about anything that we've talked about. It's a lot of time being spent on that. And I was having lunch in New York recently, and there was a birthday party happening on the table next to me, a mom, a dad, and their 1-year-old. was given for her birthday a smartphone, and then after they gave it to her, the three of them were all on their own smartphones and not talking to her. It was unbelievable.
I see it virtually every time I'm out to dinner.
So this is a huge issue. I think the first thing is the adults. What's that?
Take the phones away from all.
Yeah, exactly. So take the phones away from all of them. That's ultimately the idea, is you got to put those things down. What's that?
There's your next book.
There's the next book, that's right. You know, studies even show if you put a cell phone on a dinner table, no one picks it up. It makes the conversation much more superficial. Just the idea that something might happen to pull you out of that. So these things have really changed the culture. And so it can come down to just say, no, you can't have this cell phone all the time like that, or you get it for these hours or whatever. I think there needs to be some very clear boundaries about that. The same thing with television. You know, I mean, in our house, for example, we had no television during the week. None. It was just easier. Zero.
I'm actually more concerned, I shouldn't say more, I'm equally as concerned not with child and adolescent screen use. I'm just as concerned about parental screen use. And there was that study, I think there were 12-month-olds, and there was a new toy placed on the table, and they measured the child's attention span with this new toy. And when the parent gave attention to the toy or to the child's attention span was for a much significantly longer period of time than if they had the parent pull out their phone and not attend to the child and not attend to the toy. And so my colleague Olivia and I were talking on the way here tonight. We're both in classrooms frequently, and we're seeing in kindergarten classrooms, you know, kids who grew up with iPads and phones, all of those things. It's really difficult for the attention span of a whole generation is really concerning. Now, I don't want to say universally screens are terrible. I love that my kids can FaceTime with their grandparents who live in Texas. It can create connection. We just have to be so thoughtful about how we use them.
Yeah, and next week I'm going to a think tank up in the same place I was up before, 1440, with a bunch of academics from all over the world, where we're thinking about how to make the digital world, the screen world, actually promote compassion and empathy. So stay tuned, and I'll give you what our report is afterwards. But a number of us, including our Mindset Institute, we have stuff where we're trying to do that.
And after that, I want to make sure you've had a question for a really long time. I want to make sure we get that too.
Hi. So I have a daughter who has anxiety a lot of times, and to the point where I would say she gets into that red zone and doesn't want to attend that activity or event because she's so nervous and anxious. How can I get her out of that zone and help her through so that she can have a yes brain and an open mind and be open to those experiences?
How old is she?
She's 10 right now.
Okay.
Well, the chapter on resilience in the Yes Brain will probably be really helpful to you because it walks through a bunch of really practical strategies. There's a whole section in there of what we call push-in and cushion. How do you know when you should be doing push-in and saying, you know, you really need to go to this, and when do we say that's okay, you don't have to go, and that kind of thing. There are studies that show that if we push kids too hard, if their temperament is such that they feel their neuroception goes danger, 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 and it throws them into a dysregulated state in a new circumstance. And if we just throw them into it and say, you got to do it, it overwhelms them and they feel a threat response. And they go, that was so unpleasant, I never want to try that again. So if we do too much too soon, that actually increases anxiety and doesn't give skills. But if we don't give them opportunities to expand their capacity, or what Dan's beautiful phrase, her window of tolerance, then she may stay in that kind of anxious state. So it's about providing her with small baby steps that she can tolerate. We don't want toxic stress, but we want tolerable stress, because when something's difficult and we do it anyway and we get through it and we feel okay about it, it actually expands our capacity. So you want to be doing a little bit of pushing with her, but with lots of empathy and lots of I'm right here with you, and steps where she can tolerate it, so you're expanding her capacity. That's just one tiny response. You probably have that.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, you know, if you have time, well, literally on Saturday, we're going to go through the entire outline of strategies across the breed. So it'll be a very cheesy morning. But you come, because literally once you start learning these as a parent, you learn, you to start with yourself and then bring that kind of approach to your child. So if you could join us, that would be terrific. Let's see. How are we on time? Are we good?
We have time for two
more questions. Okay. You've been waiting.
Okay, she's up. Thank you.
Okay, two more. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you guys, first of all. As a parent of 3, you mentioned the red zone is contagious. I mean, yeah, the red zone is rapidly contagious. And you also mentioned the example of when you separated your children, or at least you spoke to them separately. Do you have a way of collectively bringing down the red zone and holding your form of discipline with several at the same time?
Yes, that's such a good question. I have a couple suggestions. First of all, think about what are the times when most of us go into this place. And oftentimes it's mornings, getting ready in the morning, getting out the door, where we had a lot of chaos and red zone kinds of things. So proactively, one of the things I did is how can I slow things down to make it just a kind of more of a haven, more of a calm thing. Having music on in the mornings and slowing down my own pace. A lot of people assume that emotions start in the brain, and they can and do, but they also can originate very much in the body. So if I walk around like this, I'm just rushing around, and, like mornings are, when I move my body that way, it actually activates a whole neural network of what emotions and thoughts and behaviors go with that kind of movement. So if I intentionally walk more slowly, talk more slowly, take deeper breaths, that activates totally different neural networks. So kind of look for problem spots, do some intentionality around that. The other thing I would say is, back in the day as a parent, I remember learning some things like, okay, count to 10, that'll help me stay calm. That never worked for me. When I started studying with Dan, and I was also doing clinical work with these families, I happened upon this thing on accident. It was sort of an accident as a clinician that I have to say is probably the thing that most people have come back to me and said, that is sort of magic. Now, nothing's magic, but this is really helpful for me and for now thousands of people, and it's in the no drama discipline book too. I was working with this family where everyone went into the red zone. There was a lot of yelling and a lot of chaos constantly. And the dad in particular, we talked about how his son would go red very easily. We wanted to peel back layers to figure out what that was about, and the child actually had a sensory processing challenge that was a cause of a lot of this. But the dad's perspective on it was that it was characterological. It was just this kid's character, that he was spoiled and all of these things. So one of the things that I taught the dad to do was to stop talking and yelling so much and to put his body below eye level to his child in a really relaxed posture. So if his child was standing, I said, I want you to sit on the couch, or if your child is sitting or standing, you can sit on the floor, crisscross applesauce, lean back on your arms in a really relaxed posture. Yes, that's beautiful, to be relaxed. And when you do that, I said, well, I want you to get below eye level in a relaxed posture, and I want you to only say 2 things. 1, something empathetic about how your little child feels, like I can see you're really frustrated right now. And the second thing would be to say, I'm right here with you. Now let's pause for 1 second. When I say that, I can see you're really upset right now. I'm right here with you. Just saying that. I was teaching a bunch of therapists this, and I said, well, what would it have been like at our moments when we were most upset if our parents had said to us, I'm right here with you. And one woman, a few people cried, and then one woman raised her hand, she said, none of us would have become therapists. Below eye level relaxed posture. And I said, say something empathetic, say I'm right here with you. He said, you want me to sit in a submissive posture to my child? And I said, no, I want you to sit in I want you to do some strategic posturing to downregulate the nervous system. It sounded more scientific. And so I didn't think I would ever see them again because Dad was not on board with this. So a couple weeks later they come back. And I actually did get paid, so that was good. A couple weeks later, they come back, and he said, Tina, I told my wife as soon as we knew you couldn't hear us, we closed the door. I said, I'm never coming back here. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's indulgent. She's going to make our child even more spoiled. He needs stricter discipline. So I said, but you're back. What? Tell me why you're back. And he said, in a moment of desperation, my child was raging. I was raging. I was yelling. He said, I sat down on the floor. He said, I don't think I did it right, but I said, I can tell you're really mad, but I'll sit here with you. And he said, my child calmed down faster than I've ever seen him calm down. He said, but something interesting happened. He said, I stayed calm in a way that I've never been able to. And then we can talk about these neural networks and how if you are in a fight posture and you have an aggressive look on your face and an aggressive tone of voice and you're wagging your finger at your child, you are activating a fighting, no-brain neural network. But if you
within yourself,
that's what gets activated. But if you sit in a relaxed posture, and there's something about below eye level that tells that person and yourself there's no threat, you're safe, right? So sitting in that posture and sitting in a relaxed position, you're activating a totally different neural network. So what I would say is that for me and for many of the clients I've worked with, when we, even if we already are ready, if we start or if we feel ourselves going there, if we slow down our breathing, if we sit in a relaxed posture, if we roll our shoulders back, put on some music, we can totally activate a different neural network so that calm is our automatic in the moment.
Beautiful. Isn't Tina amazing? I think we have time for one more question. Who's got the talking stick? There you go.
Thank you so much. We have a 2.5-year-old, very big emotions.
You're out tonight.
Yeah. He's really good at getting to the red zone. We've read in a number of different places, and we've tried to employ active ignoring when he's doing something annoying, but I mean not harmful, but annoying, or just acting out. And that seems, from what you're telling us, to sound kind of counterproductive. Is that something that we should be doing or not? And use of timeouts.
You can tell I'm eager.
This is Tina's favorite subject right here.
Well, first of all, is it working?
He can calm down. He does calm down, and then we attend to him.
Okay. So that's always the first question we want to ask, or one of the first questions we want to ask is it working? Because parents will say, like this dad I was just talking about, he said, well, he needs stricter discipline. And I said, well, what are you doing? And he said, stricter discipline. And it just wasn't working, but they continued with it. So, okay, here's what I would say. The attachment research that Dan has taught me that I've been very influenced by talks about how it's a mammal instinct within us, so an attachment instinct, that when we're in distress to go to our attachment figures, okay? So when your child is most distressed, your child's biology is to go to your parent, right? Your attachment figures, who will help you feel connected and protected, and who will help you get back into the green zone so you feel safe and all of these things. Attention is a need. It's a biological need, just like eating and sleeping is. So when we've all been taught this, I was taught this as a parent too, that you should ignore a child if you don't want the behavior. But for me, that's really problematic, because if the child is doing something that's not okay, that is an opportunity, first of all, to build a skill. And if we ignore, that's not doing anything to build a skill, okay? Also, it tells our child, when you're in distress and when you're falling apart, I'm not interested in being in a relationship with you. And so I love that when we talk about attention as a biological need, it'd be like saying, we say she's just trying to get attention. That'd be saying like she's just trying to eat meals, she's just trying to eat food. Because we have to have our parents' attention, because if they're not giving us their attention, we're going to get eaten by something, right? This is how our primitive brains are wired. So attention is a need. And if it is a need and you're not getting it, what do you have to do to get your need met? Bigger, worse behaviors, right? So I do find it's often counterproductive. Going back to recognizing an emotion, understanding an emotion, labeling the emotion, that's an opportunity. A 2.5-year-old kind of has a baby green zone. You cut their muffin in half and they're like, go to the red zone, So that's developmentally appropriate that your child's in the red zone a lot, because that's what 2.5-year-olds' brains are like. That's developmentally appropriate. So I would just say this is an opportunity when your child is having a behavior. You can say, I can see you're having a hard time right now, or you're so frustrated, and you can address the behavior. This isn't about being permissive. You can address the behavior, talk about feelings, and then move on.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. And I think the idea here for all the things that we try to teach about is, can you teach a skill? So in this case, ultimately you're teaching a skill of an internal compass, where your relationship will build this capacity for insight in your child that is connected directly to empathy? Or are you doing things like behavior approaches that may tend to actually create a wall? So you can teach kids to build a wall so that they shut themselves off from others or from themselves. That's definitely doable. We see this in about 20% of the population in attachment research that has what's called an avoidant attachment. And it's a way you can deal with that. Or you can actually maintain the connection. So when you're saying attention, it's this large thing. In fact, Tina's center is called the Center for Connection. You know, this idea that the attention that we seek is to actually have a connection. Now, that doesn't mean you respond to every outburst that your child's doing, but it means you stay present and you see the art of doing that. You know, we hope that all these things that we're saying to everyone today is something that will be of use as you go through it. Parenting is probably the hardest job in the world. And the reason Tina and I always put in our books, you know, ways we goofed up is because you can't do it perfectly. So you got to let that go and realize that repair is really the way to go. You realize you have an aim for where you're going in a general direction, and if it doesn't go that way, you can make a repair. And then find support in your friends and your partners in any way you can, because it's hard to do this alone. We were meant to actually raise children in community, and that's a part of the whole issue, just that we'll conclude with, about redefining success. For you as a parent, success can mean just connecting to other people and teaching your child that who they are is not just a solo self in the world, that if you study all the things about happiness, medical health, mental health, and even how long you live, what is the research finding that's shared with those four things? Happiness, how long you live, medical health, and mental health. Relationships. Relationships, connections is what we mean. Relationships are the predictor of all four of those factors. So that's why we talk about connection in all the parenting approaches we do. So thank you so much for your connection here.